Hello everyone, thank you for joining us. The world depends on software. We can no longer live without software. Everything we do at work, in our lives, is powered by thousands of lines of code. When I wake up in the morning, my alarm will ring on a smartphone and my watch will tell me how I slept. I read the news on my phone, I check my email, I catch up with family and team members, I may take a photo of my latte in a fancy coffee shop, I track my runs, and of course I can schedule a doctor's appointment. And that's only a subset of one day in our lives. Millions of developers build and maintain the software that runs our world. And open source plays a big role in this. In fact, over 90% of software has some dependency on open source. It has a dependency on developers and maintainers from around the world innovating together and contributing code. There is no single company that can outcompete open source for collaboration. So as a software company, how do you keep innovating? How do you empower your developers to deliver for business and work alongside the open source community? Well, for starters, you can have your developers collaborate with each other in the same way that open source projects collaborate, across boundaries, across silos, and across country borders. That's the power of the interconnected community. And at GitHub, we are on a mission to accelerate human progress through developer collaboration. And that starts by thinking developers first. With every decision we make, every product we design, with every process we implement, we want to empower developers to do their best work on GitHub. And we have seen customers joining us on this journey by empowering their own developers to help build the future of software alongside the open source community. Several years ago, we started working with a team at 3M. And you might know them from the Post-it notes, but they have created over 60,000 products from across the world. They were struggling with how to share knowledge, how to break through silos that left their code scattered in a ton of places. They wanted to innovate, like the open source community, and work together globally. So they decided to choose GitHub to help power the next stage of innovation. And what started with a few developers sharing AI models grew into over 1,600 developers using GitHub to optimize their development processes and speed up their time to market. The team at 3M never mandated GitHub. Their developers chose to move their software collaboration to GitHub in the cloud and are quickly modernizing their entire toolchain. They started using GitHub Actions, which is our CI/CD platform, to power deployments to their multi-cloud infrastructure. And they're also adopting other GitHub features, like Dependabot, and they're using our security pipeline to help secure their end-to-end software supply chain. This is the true power of thinking developer first. By empowering developers to do their best work on GitHub, we enable companies like 3M or your company to harness the power of GitHub alongside the open source community. And we're just getting started. Whether you're a startup building your first big app or a multinational corporation spanning the globe, we want to help you build the world's best software, today and in the future. Speaking of the future, when we look ahead, we see that the future of software development has 4 major trends. And the first is that software development is moving to the cloud. Developers have spent the last 10 years or so on moving other professionals to the cloud. Salespeople with Salesforce, designers with Figma, accountants with NetSuite, and yet software development is still mostly local. Last year, we launched a new product called Codespaces, which moves the whole software environment to a virtual machine. A software developer still uses a laptop, of course, to connect to that cloud. But the whole environment, all the dependencies, everything needed to edit and run your project is now hosted in the cloud. At GitHub, we have moved over 800 developers to Codespaces and reduced the onboarding time from 45 minutes to less than a single minute. Our developers, our team members, even I as the CEO, can now easily set up an environment and get started on a project. The second area is to empower developers with artificial intelligence. AI enables developers to have an assistant on their side, and the first such product is GitHub Copilot. With Copilot, developers can stay in their editor. Copilot understands the context of what the developer is writing and proposes what you may type next, from multi-line code blocks to whole methods. This is insanely powerful even in the early days. And if we look at files where Copilot is enabled, we see up to 35 to 40% of new code is written by Copilot. And if you compare that to the productivity gains from DevOps, it is mind-blowing. Copilot actually makes developers more productive by keeping them in their editor, in their flow of productivity, and generating value for their company's customers. Copilot would not exist without the open source it was trained on. So my third focus area is open source. Almost all software today depends on open source. We believe open source has won, not only as a philosophy of publishing source code, but more so as a way for many developers to collaborate with each other. Open source contributions make technology better for everyone. And it has become synonymous with enterprise software. The unaffiliated nature of open source means that the community that maintains it plays a role in advancing overall innovation for all of us. These developers are part of our teams, and it is our responsibility to support sustainable open source. And open source impacts your security posture. You might have hundreds of projects in your own company, but you're likely using thousands of open source components. Every single project, internal or external, needs to be constantly scanned for code and runtime vulnerabilities, scanned for secrets and code, and scanned for injected malware. At GitHub, we are on a mission to help customers secure their code with tools like CodeQL and Dependabot, but we are also helping open source maintainers to secure their projects. No single company can secure their software supply chain on their own. We all need to work together on this. Thank you so much for joining us at InFocus. We're excited to partner with you to accelerate your software delivery, optimize your efficiency, and secure your software as well as your software supply chain.
Thanks, Thomas. Hi, I'm Matthew, the SVP of Product at GitHub, and I'm here with you today to chat about how you can build amazing software experiences with GitHub. You may have heard this years ago, but it remains true even today. Regardless of our industries, we're in the midst of transforming all businesses to software businesses. And as a software business, we find that very relatable when you consider the complexity of the tool stack, the talent shortage, and the speed at which we have to operate. Reaching our goals feels challenging at times. The good news is when we accelerate the delivery of high-quality, secure software, we gain a key competitive advantage in our segments. We all need to accept that crafting custom solutions and attaching point solutions to invent our own stack is more hassle than it's worth, and it will not scale. What if we could take the best of open source and cutting-edge innovation and take our business to the next level? We can accomplish that together on GitHub, and Kevin's going to give us a quick example of how. Over to you, Kevin.
Hello and welcome. My name is Kevin Alwell. I'm a Principal Enterprise Solutions Engineer at GitHub. Today, I'm going to be walking you through how all these features and how this strategy manifests in terms of enterprise capabilities across the platform. So for what that means for us is we're going to migrate an application from a third-party SCM tool into GitHub. We're going to translate a pipeline into an actions workflow, use some of the latest and greatest capabilities across the platform, and then ultimately deploy it out into Azure. So buckle up. It'll be an action-packed 10 minutes. It's a privilege to be here walking you through this. And so I appreciate your time and obviously your attention. And so one thing that I abstracted here from the demo was I used the GitHub Enterprise importer to actually create a migration script. And so that migration script will be applied to all the repos in my organization, in this case, GitHub Enterprise Server into my GitHub Enterprise Cloud org. Okay, and so my repo is already there. I also automatically translated using Valet my Jenkins pipeline into a GitHub Actions workflow. You can see that this pull request was dynamically created for me that I'll reference in a little while. The last thing I'll call out is Valet does translation from Jenkins and Circle CI. This supports many third-party CI providers, and it also can audit your existing pipelines to understand your footprint and how that would translate into Actions workflows. Super useful. Okay, now that we're here, maybe some of the first things I'll show you is actually Codespaces, your cloud-hosted IDE. So if you want to accelerate the time to productivity for your developers, a cloud-hosted IDE is often a good option to do that. That's what we've done at GitHub, is actually adopted Codespaces to bootstrap our own application. And one level deeper in CodeSpace is actually using the new pre-build capability. And so that actually takes all your IDE dependencies, it stands up a container image, and then when you actually go to launch your CodeSpace, it pulls it off the rack and makes it available to your devs. And so you can see that's actually what I have here is this pre-built CodeSpace environment stood up and accessible through my browser. So if I did something like npm start, I should see my application running on port 3000. Highly sophisticated application. There it is as a calculator. Okay, what I did want to call out here is actually how we standardize this cloud IDE environment and your pre-build environment, what it actually interprets for building that image. And this is this dev container file. You can see in this case, I've included Copilot. That's what we'll be testing together. And this is how I actually pre-installed my dependencies was to run this post create command. Okay, and so maybe the first thing we'll do is validate that Copilot's here. Again, if you haven't heard of Copilot, it's your pair AI programmer. So I basically described to Copilot what I'd like to implement in human kind of readable comment text here, and it actually suggests the logic based on what's been done in the open source community. So we have a model trained on that data. So I say something like add all numbers in an array. We might get a function suggested here that adds all numbers in an array. Similarly, I might be able to call a third-party API and it would understand those endpoints. So I don't have to go to Stack Overflow. I don't have to go to those that documentation. I might say, get all members of my GitHub organization. Okay, and so then I might get, you can see here, this is actually supposed to be your org ID. It's aware of this members, Copilot's aware of this members endpoint. All I have to do is kind of massage it a little bit as a developer. Otherwise, I can use this code in order to get all the members of my GitHub organization. There's a stat that says 35% of the code that's committed where a developer has Copilot enabled is actually generated by Copilot. So it's a third increase in productivity, which is massive. That's why I love it. When I do my development for you or for my other customers, this is what I'm using on the back end to make life a little bit more simple. Okay, now let's dive in here into the new projects V2. I want to showcase some of the progress we're making in planning and tracking. And again, I know we're moving fast here. This is just giving you a taste of some of the latest capabilities. One of the first things you'll notice here is that this is actually a project that spans multiple repositories. All my work items are tracked in a very familiar way, kind of like an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, I can also view those work items in a typical Kanban board style to track our delivery toward an alpha. I might also look for something like, for example, this kind of parent-child relationship as I'm tracking progress towards some greater deliverable, right? Some epic as those work items get delivered. And that's what you'll notice here. The last thing that I'll show you, maybe second to last thing, is how you can actually group your tasks by the label. So you can actually group your task by, for example, the urgency or the priority of these features. And so to do that, I might press Command K on my project board. I might say something like group by, and in this case, I might group by my iteration. And I, as a PM, as a product owner, I can actually come in and see, hey, here's what's in progress today for this current sprint cycle. Okay, and so let's together take off this work item consume reusable deployment workflow to Azure. And so the work item is exactly that. And what I'll do is actually see, has anyone else in my org already implemented this reusable workflow? Or does it exist in the org? And so to do that, I do use our new code search functionality that's actually stack ranks your results based on the relevance to you today. That's actually not done in the regular search. It's all random. So I think this experience is nicely curated. Now, the experience here is pretty cool. I can see basically at the top level, any reference to deploy node. I can also see there's this consumer workflow. Here is the parent, though. This reusable workflow that I want to consume is an org workflow that deploys a node app into Azure. And so maybe it says to consume. I want to capture that. Maybe one thing I'll mention to you about this reusable workflow is it's actually running on a custom hosted runner that has enhanced compute, storage, and also a reduced range of IP addresses, which is awesome from an InfoSec perspective. Okay, and so I've already captured what this workflow does. So I go back to my code space. Maybe I go to my centralized deploy. I go add deploy here. So into my own pipeline, my own deployment pipeline, I capture this reusable workflow. Let's go ahead and use that to run a deployment. Okay, so maybe I say, see what files have been changed. Git commit, my monitor's too low here. Git commit, add deploy, pipeline, git push. Awesome. So now I push this, which means my deployment's been kicked off. One last piece of new functionality that I'm going to show you, I know it's already been action-packed, everything's come and gone in a flash, is this new push protection feature we've shipped for advanced security customers. And so this is a GitHub token that I'm adding to this reusable workflow. And what I want to do is actually proactively block this credential from making its way back into my source code. Today, we already have detection for kind of reactive controls. Have I already pushed a credential in my source code? And this will prevent that from happening in the first place. So if I want to git add my, again, my .github directory, git commit, and I will say add cred, git push. And what we'll notice is that this has actually been blocked. So the push protection, the secret detected, this push has failed. Here's the reference for the commit, the file, the line, and I can actually go and circumvent that as a developer. If for some reason I know that this is used in tests, it's a false positive, or I'll fix it later. And then I have the temporary ability to push that credential back to the repo. So now we're kind of just adding these guardrails without being too invasive to the developer experience. Now, I haven't forgotten that we've kicked off this deployment workflow. So that's the last thing we'll do together, is actually validate that we've successfully deployed to Azure. So let me go to, let's go to our reusable workflow here. Add a reusable workflow. Let's check out the deployment pipeline, and we can see that our application's been deployed, and that application is now in Azure. Beautiful. The application's been deployed to Azure using a reusable workflow. So again, let's talk about what we've already seen. The GitHub Enterprise Importer to move your source code from third-party SCM into GitHub. We've seen translation for your pipelines from Azure DevOps into GitHub Actions workflows. We use a code space with a pre-build, which accelerates our developers' ability, again, to get up and running on a new project. We've seen Projects V2, our new planning and tracking tools, some of the cool capabilities under the hood there for our power users, reusable workflows, searchability, custom hosted runners, and advanced security push protection. So there's so much out there for you to get your hands on. I encourage you to do that, ask us questions, and we love to work with you. So thank you so much, and let's get back to the program.
Thanks, Kevin. As a software developer myself, when I see an end-to-end demo like that, I get so excited. And that excitement comes from a grounded why. Each of the technologies showcased has tremendous potential to enhance developer productivity and accelerate your business. If you're not using GitHub Enterprise yet, check out our free trial. And if you're already a GitHub Enterprise customer, thank you. We'd love to chat about how we can help you get the most value from our platform and use the whole suite of features that Kevin just showed us. Using GitHub's complete suite of solutions helps you simplify your tech stack and improve your team's developer productivity. Let me give you some examples. 3M moved from 400 to 6,000 deployments in just 60 days. Synergy eliminated more than 60 vulnerabilities in one service alone by standardizing on GitHub Advanced Security. And just like 3M and Synergy, you can accelerate your software delivery with GitHub's innovative solutions, all while knowing that it can support you at any scale. Thanks again for joining us for GitHub InFocus. We're excited to see what amazing experiences you build on GitHub.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to InFocus, and thank you for joining me. We're going to talk about productivity today, a keyword that we hear everywhere. And I'm going to walk you through what research shows can help you and your team and your organization not only become more productive, but continue to be productive long-term in a healthy way. I'm Eirini Kalliamvakou. I am a researcher here at GitHub. I work out of GitHub Next, where we innovate and we create what is going to be the future of software development. I'm also a member of the Developer Velocity Lab, and this is a research initiative between GitHub and Microsoft, where we're focusing on how can we improve the now for software development. We are a team of researchers and data scientists. We discover tools and processes through research that really work for developers and help them be more productive, more efficient, healthier, and happier. Why do we talk about and think about developer productivity so much? There are a couple of reasons. The first one is that developer productivity is really, really important to get right. It underlines the success of any organization, and it does it in a number of different ways. So perhaps you're recognizing yourself here. Maybe you're thinking about how to accelerate your software development. How can you be going to market faster? How can you be building software in tighter cycles? Maybe you're thinking about how you can be building software that is more secure or more reliable. Maybe you're thinking about improving your own organizational efficiency. How can you, for example, be making better planning decisions faster? Or maybe you're thinking about improving your developers' well-being and their retention down the line. All of these things are things that are directly influenced by developer productivity. And we find case study after case study after case study that those organizations that pay attention to developer productivity and support it well, they end up performing better too. Unfortunately, important as it is to get developer productivity right, we do often get it wrong. And that's only because productivity is complicated and the concept has been around for a long time, so it has accumulated some myths and misconceptions that sometimes can just throw off our thinking. For example, we hear from a lot of teams and organizations who care about developer productivity, but they only ever measure developer activity. They track activity over time. They look at dashboards of lines of code, numbers of commits, numbers of pull requests. But what we find is that those activity counts alone are not enough to predict successful outcomes. We could be looking at dashboards all day long, and whether our numbers of commits are going up or down is not going to tell us with confidence if we're on track to hit our revenue goals for the quarter or if our products are going to delight our customers. Other times we hear that productivity measures are only ever relevant to you if you're a manager. And again, we find in the research, and I'm going to share some of that later, that productivity measures are incredibly beneficial for individual developers and their personal productivity too. They can show them how to improve and when to improve and what if we do it right. And they can increase their satisfaction, they can improve their well-being, and they can increase their confidence too. When something is really important to get right, we don't want to be getting it wrong. So here is one thing that I would like you to be thinking about as I talk through the research and the insights today. And that is that when we say we want improved productivity, nobody wants that improvement to only last a week or a sprint or a quarter. What we really want is productivity improvements that we can sustain over time. And if we only ever look at activity, that's not enough to get us there. Think about this. Maybe you've seen this in your organization too. Sometimes teams push themselves hard towards a ship deadline and they get activity spikes. They do manage to get a lot more done than usual in that time frame. But is that sustainable? Is that their new rhythm of work that they can maintain past the deadline? Probably not. When teams operate that way, they conquer quick productivity wins, and those can feel great. Sometimes they're essential, but they can also backfire if we do it for too long. They can create fatigue and burnout for teams, and both of those are incredibly costly. So the smart use of resources and the smart investment is to think past only the next quarter and how to set yourself up to have productivity improvements and benefits that are going to see you through the next 3 to 5 years. And you don't have to do it in the dark. You don't have to do it alone. I can guide you through it with the latest research. So today, I'm going to talk to you about 3 things. 1, we're going to talk about a new productivity framework, a way to measure productivity called SPACE. 2, I'm going to talk to you about how we use SPACE here at GitHub to help developers improve their own personal productivity in the Good Day project. And finally, we're going to look at 3 trends from the 2021 State of the Octoverse report that can show you how you can help your organization become more productive and sustain the productivity improvements over time. So let's dig in and start talking about the SPACE of developer productivity. This is a brand new framework. It was published last year from Nicole Forsgren and collaborators from Microsoft Research and the University of Victoria. What's special about space is that it is holistic. And it takes into consideration a lot more dimensions and a lot more metrics around productivity and the trade-offs between them. And in that sense, it can bypass all of the productivity myths and misconceptions I mentioned earlier. Space is also very intentional about incorporating well-being aspects. We want to make sure that any productivity measures and metrics we're putting in place work for the developers themselves too. And it's that combination of perspectives, being holistic and incorporating well-being aspects, that really makes productivity sustainable. SPACE is an acronym. S is for satisfaction and well-being, P is for performance, A is for activity, C is for communication and collaboration, and E is for efficiency and flow. And already you can see that there's a lot more going on here than just activity. Activity is still there, but it's not the full picture. So I'm going to go through, and for each dimension, I'm going to say a little bit about what's included and a couple of metrics that you would expect to be associated with that dimension. The first one looks at satisfaction and well-being. Both of those are critical parts. They directly influence developer productivity. So we want to make sure that we are tracking both of those. And here you could be thinking about metrics like employee satisfaction, level of engagement, level of burnout. We find more and more that companies track these indicators over time, and they usually do it through surveys, which is a great practice because information about satisfaction and well-being doesn't really live in any telemetry. So this is really a dimension that looks at how happy and fulfilled developers are with the type of work that they do, the tools that they use, and the culture and environment that they're in. The next dimension, performance, is about outcomes. How well did we do? And here we want to be thinking about way more than just how much we did. The impact of our code, the quality of our code, the level of customer satisfaction that we generate, these are all things that are important for performance. Performance is also not a binary. It's not, did we do well or not? And the reason is that some of these aspects and these metrics of performance have trade-offs between them. So maybe we write a lot of code, but it's not good quality. Or maybe we are shipping features on time, but they don't really get adopted. Or maybe sometimes a lot of different metrics seem to be moving in the right direction. We write a lot of code, it ships on time, it is high quality, features get adopted, they generate revenue, but our developers are burnt out. So how good our performance is always relevant to what our goals are. What is it that is important to you? And that's how we pick metrics as well. We have way more metrics than we'll ever be able to use. The key aspect is to pick the relevant ones. Goals come first, metrics come next, and the metrics that you use in your organization when it comes to performance may be very different from another organization just because you have different goals. Activity is typically the dimension that people think about when they think about productivity. And of course, it's very important to keep track of activity over time, but we also want to make sure that we're capturing all of the different activities that developers engage in. And today, they're doing more than writing code and designing systems. One of my personal favorites to highlight is mentorship, which kind of happens out of sight. Mentorship, you will hear later from the 2021 State of the Octoverse report, it's incredibly beneficial for teams and organizations. And it's also an activity that developers do more and more of as they go through their careers and they become more senior. And yet, it happens pretty much invisibly. It's not tracked anywhere, and it doesn't happen within any engineering system that we track of. So when we think about activity, we want to be thinking broadly to make sure we're capturing all the different things that developers do. Communication and collaboration focuses on teams. What is it that teams need to get their work done? And that might include things that we don't typically think about. So for example, how long does it take to find a colleague that has expertise that can help you solve a problem you're stuck on? Or how easy is it to find the right information, the right documentation about an area of the code base you're working on? These are tricky aspects to quantify. So again, we want to make sure that we're going back to developers as the source of truth, usually with something like a survey. And finally, efficiency and flow. This one is becoming more and more critical to developer productivity. And in fact, if you hear developers say that they've had a particularly productive day or productive week, this is what they're talking about. You may have heard of the concept of flow. I'm oversimplifying, but flow is a state that when we enter it and stay in it long enough, it's a state of intense concentration and it makes us more efficient. Now, unfortunately, it's also a fragile state. It's hard to get into, it's easy to get out of, especially if we experience a lot of fragmentation in our days. So we could be looking at efficiency and flow from the individual perspective. What's the level of interruption that somebody is experiencing throughout their day? How easy or hard is it in their view to enter and stay in a state of flow? We could also be looking at efficiency and flow from a system perspective. How long does it take for a task to be completed end to end within a system or a process? And what part of that time is value adding time versus time that is spent on things like delays and handoffs? That was an overview of what goes into the SPACE framework. And when we say that it is holistic, what is it that we mean? There's a lot more to dig into. Definitely check out the Developer Velocity Lab website because there's a longer recorded talk there that goes more into the specifics. And of course, the paper if you want to get all the information. But for the practical application in your organization, here's the pro tip. We recommend that you pick 3 out of the 5 dimensions of the SPACE framework. And for each one of those 3 dimensions, you pick a couple of metrics to cover each one. That should give you enough to get you out of the habit of only tracking activity over time and to give you a baseline of being holistic. And then over time, you can gradually progress to a state where you are covering all of the 5 dimensions with multiple metrics for each one. Now, that was a little bit about how you can use SPACE to benefit your organization, how you can change your thinking and you can start picking metrics that work for you. Can you also use it to improve your own personal productivity though? Spoiler, you can. We tested that here at GitHub through the Good Day project. And you may have heard or read something about the Good Day project. We published it last year in the GitHub blog. What we were trying to do with the Good Day project was to empower developers, give developers the means to improve their own days and improve their own productivity in a way that fits them. Because believe it or not, developers most of the time are not getting what they need out of productivity tools and productivity trackers. And you may have seen this for yourself. Productivity trackers typically take a very activity-oriented approach. So they count thing XYZ that you did, or how long it took you to do thing XYZ, and then they give you a score, or they show you how you're doing relative to some sort of benchmark. We have been talking to developers for a very long time, so I feel confident when I tell you that developers really hate that approach to productivity. They find it anxiety-inducing. They find that it doesn't really do justice to how multifaceted their work is because it keeps being reduced to only a couple of things. They have seen, unfortunately, in the past, these very activity-oriented approaches be used against them. And to them, the whole thing feels like spying. So over time, developers have become suspicious when it comes to productivity tools and productivity trackers, and even the word productivity itself. So we were thinking, putting developers first, what should their experience be? What is the right information to put in front of developers to help them improve? How can we do that without breaking anything for them, while also safeguarding their privacy every step of the way? Because developers do care about data and they do care about productivity, but their concept and their experience of productivity is more like having a good day. And that's very different from what they typically get from productivity tools that they're asked to use. We had an approach, we wanted to test it. Here's what we did. For 2 weeks, every day, we sent engineers at GitHub a 2-minute survey to fill out. All of the questions that were included in that survey came from the SPACE framework. That's how we used it. And there we asked them how much they worked with others that day, how much they helped others, how many breaks they took, how many meetings they had, what was their sentiment for the day. All of these things are critical parts of the daily lives of developers, and yet we never track them and monitor them anywhere. And after 2 weeks of these daily surveys, we sent each person who participated their own personalized report. This was something that was specific to them. It only had their data on it, nobody else's, and they were the only ones who had access to it, nobody else. There we gave them a series of charts and some text on how to digest the information, how to understand their patterns, and how to start thinking about what they want to improve in their productivity in their days. And the developers who participated really loved this approach. We saw really high engagement, and they reported back to us that they got real value out of this exercise. They really were able to understand their patterns, come up with concrete ideas of what they want to improve, and start implementing those improvements into their days. They also didn't have any privacy concerns, and they were delighted by the whole experience. In fact, many of them continued with the daily surveys even after our experiment was done. Now, why did they continue? It turns out the daily act of self-reflection had a benefit in itself. So above and beyond anything else we gave developers, those 2 minutes at the end of the day to reflect with a couple of questions, or a handful of questions rather, help developers be more intentional about how they spend their time and more mindful during their day. And it also gave them a very clear endpoint to their day, which, as the boundaries between work and life have blurred quite a bit, it has become harder and harder for people to do. We also looked across everyone's data because we wanted to see if there are any patterns that are showing up. And sure enough, we saw exactly how critical the efficiency and flow dimension of the SPACE framework really is, because with minimal to no interruptions, developers have an excellent chance of having a good day. We found 82%. But then when they start experiencing a lot of interruptions, it blows everything up. And the same goes for making progress. Going from having 2 meetings per day on average to having 3 meetings per day on average brought down the chance of developers being able to make progress by 60%. And that is a huge impact. We're not saying let's not have meetings, but we are saying let's be intentional about how many meetings we have and when we have them, because clearly there are very large productivity benefits that we could be enjoying when we do that. The 2-minute-a-day reflection was a benefit that was mentioned by every single person. So if there's one thing to take away, it's that. And that's great news because anyone can get started with this at any given point. Today, if you want to, after this presentation, if you want to, you can use the questions from the Good Day survey. We have shared those on the GitHub blog, and you can take 2 minutes at the end of the day to answer them and reflect to start seeing the improvements for yourself. Now, let's look at 3 trends from the 2021 State of the Octoverse report. And these trends represent areas for long-term investment and opportunity in your organization and your community if you're working with one. And they're coming from a pretty detailed and thorough investigation of an unprecedented scale. For the 2021 State of the Octoverse report, which has been our largest one yet, we analyzed data from over 3.5 million repositories and responses from over 40,000 developers to a very detailed and lengthy survey. I think we can all observe that the workplace is shifting. It certainly has shifted the last year. That came through very clearly in the survey. Developers from all over the world expressed the expectation to be working differently moving forward. We had 46% of the participants who worked in companies and who were previously co-located, now expecting to work in a fully remote or hybrid environment. And we don't know how much of this is going to shift back, or maybe if any of this will, because some things we don't go back from. But what this highlights is the need for rethinking. Do you have the tools and the processes in place that will allow you the flexibility to work in a fully remote or hybrid environment without sacrificing efficiency? What do you need to do to get to that point? How can you make work sustainable, both for the employer and the employee, for the long term? Mentorship. I kind of hinted at this earlier. Mentorship is proving to be an all-around asset, both for open source communities and for companies. It has significant productivity benefits. We saw a 46% boost in open source teams and 16% boost in teams in companies. But it's also a multiplier when it comes to creating and sustaining a strong and healthy culture. And that is the sort of benefit that has very long-lasting effects. Maybe you're already thinking about mentorship in your organization, which is great. Maybe you have onboarding buddies when people join. Maybe you have office hours. Maybe you have a full-on official mentorship program. Maybe you're doing some of these things unofficially. In either case, know that the data shows that an intentional investment in mentorship has both short-term and long-term benefits. And finally, the most tangible and actionable way to bring sustained benefit to your organization is to improve automation. We find that removing friction really helps teams perform better in the short term, but it also allows developers to focus on the things that they are most interested in, the things that help them connect with their work and feel more fulfilled by it. And the effects of that are going to last way longer than any other productivity or performance hack. Now, we packed a lot of things in a short time, so here's the summary, here's the TLDR. Holistic measures are your friend when it comes to productivity. They allow us to take a step back, look at a lot more dimensions, a lot more metrics, pick the right ones, and that's what makes productivity sustainable. We talked about the SPACE framework. There's a lot more that you can read, both on the Developer Velocity Lab website, and if you choose to read the paper. 2 minutes at the end of your day with a handful of questions to reflect on can really make a difference on how good your workdays are. And so does the number of meetings. Try to keep your meetings to maximum 2 a day on average. I know it sounds impossible. It's probably really hard, but it really pays off. And also, take a look at the 2021 State of the Octoverse report to get all the latest and most robust research that can help your organization become more efficient, can show you ways on how you can be building more secure software faster. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this talk, and I hope that you enjoy InFocus and you find all the different ways that can inform your thinking and start achieving your goals. Thank you.